All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're here to talk about a proposed air permit again for FCA US JNAP plant. So we have talked about this proposed permit in the past, but there were some changes that led to us opening up the comment period again and asking you to join us again tonight. So we really appreciate that you have come on. We're going to get into things relatively quickly, but before we get started on all the nitty gritty that you see on the screen in front of you, I just want to introduce you guys to Jay Oligar. He is our Assistant Division Director with the Air Quality Division, and he's going to be the decision maker on this permit. And I know he wants to say a few words before we get started. So Jay, anytime you're ready, just make sure you unmute yourself, and then you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we're all set. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good. Well, thanks, Jennifer. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone personally for taking the time out of your evening to participate in this informational session and public hearing. So the draft permit that is the subject of this hearing is written with the public and the environment in mind. And public participation is very important to us at Eagle and a vital way to work toward our mission of protecting public health and the environment. Public participation also creates opportunities for conversation and discussion on the proposed permit changes at the graphic packaging. So we especially appreciate your flexibility in participating with us virtually, given the challenges posed by the current COVID-19 pandemic. We certainly understand the situation you are living in right now is very challenging, and of course, challenges can vary from person to person and family to family. We know this method of public participation is not perfect, and we welcome your thoughts as we continually look for ways to improve our outreach. So I'll be listening tonight, so my decision on the proposed permit keeps your comments and your concerns in mind. Thank you again for joining us. And at this time, Jennifer, I'll turn things back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jay. I really appreciate that. I do want to get to introducing some of the other staff that we have here tonight with us, just so that you all can put names to faces. So if my other staff folks can turn your cameras back on, that would be great. The first person I want to introduce to you is Dave Thompson. So if you didn't join us for the previous public meeting that we had, he is the permit engineer for this permit action, and you're going to be mostly hearing from him tonight when we start our information session. So he's going to kind of walk you through what actually went on with the permit, what air quality does, why we're here tonight, and so on and so forth. But we do have some other folks here that either worked on the permit or are highly invested and involved in the FCA facility. So I'm going to introduce them to you as well. I'm going to kind of just go in the order that I see everybody. So Jeff Korniski is the assistant supervisor in our Detroit district office. So he has a long history and a lot of knowledge about this facility and is going to help answer questions if you all have any towards the end there. Susan Kilmer is our air monitoring group supervisor. So anything that has to do with outdoor air monitoring and some of the monitors across the state should be able to answer questions from everyone on that. The next person I'm seeing is Mike Deppa, and Mike is our toxicologist. So he'll be here to answer your questions in that regard this evening. So we're lucky to have him on board, as well as Steph Hengsbaugh. She is our air modeler. So she was more heavily involved in the first kind of iteration of this permit. But she'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you all have on that. And we have Bob Burns with us. Bob Burns is the inspector for the facility. So any questions that you have that are compliance related and things like that, he'll be able to help you. So I'm going to let those folks turn their cameras off for now. Dave, you can choose to leave yours on or not, because I know I'm going to be turning it over to you relatively quickly after we get past the logistics here. So up to you. But we'll have our staff turn those off, and we'll invite them to turn their video cameras back on in a little bit. So if you didn't join us last time, or you haven't ever joined us for an air quality proposed permit action, or really any other air quality information session and hearing, how we do these is we first do an information session. So the information session is going to be an opportunity for you to kind of hear about a little bit about Air Quality Division if you're unfamiliar with how we sort of do business and what the roles of all the staff people are that you heard from, how people request permits from us and how we write the proposed permits for folks. And then we'll follow all of that up with a question and answer session. So that question and answer session is going to be an opportunity for all of you to to ask questions of us, ask questions of staff, and hopefully we can provide you with some answers. We'll talk a little bit about how you can ask us those questions in just a second in one of the following slides. But after that, so this is the important part, and the difference is once we get to the public hearing portion, which will start at 7 o'clock, or once all of our questions are done, whatever comes first. We'll try to get to all the questions, but sometimes you'll have a lot and we don't quite get there, but we'll do our best to answer all of them. So we start the public hearing at 7. The public hearing, once it starts, is an opportunity for you to provide us comments on what you think about the proposed permit. So some of the technical things that maybe you see as missing or some concerns that you have. But during that portion, and I'll remind you of this later as well, we won't be responding to you. So I just always want folks to be aware, question and answer, we're happy to have a dialogue. But once that public meeting starts, that public hearing, that's a more formalized session, and we don't have a lot of any give and take really in that one. After we get done with that part, and I just want to let you all know that we did extend this comment period. The comment period was originally supposed to end next Monday on the 22nd, but we have extended that till the 26th. So even after this meeting, if you don't feel comfortable giving a comment tonight, that's completely fine. There's a lot of other ways for you to provide us comment, and we take those comments in the same way that we would verbally during this meeting tonight. So this is definitely not your only opportunity. And I'll talk to you guys about ways that you can get us those comments after this meeting if you want to just have some time to collect your thoughts or submit those in writing. We'll talk a little bit just really quickly on where you can find other information. And in a little bit, I'll share a link to the information about this proposed permit in your chat. So your chat box is going to be something that I will be able to give you guys information, but your chat, you can't really chat back to me. We'll talk about how you have to use your question and answer button there in the bottom of your screen in a second. And then the last thing we'll do before we sign off tonight is just talk to you briefly about who you can contact, how you can get a hold of everybody that you heard from tonight. So as a reminder, we're going to be muting all of your lines during most of the presentation part of the meeting, and we are recording this. So what we do with the recordings is we take them and we get them closed captioned. The closed captioning is actually kind of cool because if you know somebody who has English as a second language or has another problem where they couldn't join us for tonight, they can view those at that time. If they, like I said, have English as a second language, YouTube does do a decent job of doing a written translation in a lot of different languages on the bottom once that closed captioning is done. So we'll let you know once that's finished in case, like I said, you want to share the recording or you would like to view this meeting again. So last thing before I pass this over to Dave, just to let you know, you can at any time type a question into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. I see we already have one question, or maybe it's a comment in the box, so that's great. You can also, once we get to the hearing portion of the night, when we are taking public comments, if you want to do your comment verbally for the record, you can raise your hand and verbalize your comment at that time. So the raise your hand icon is also there at the bottom of your screen. If we have anybody who calls in, and I should really just check really quickly. I didn't see anybody earlier and I don't see anybody now, but if we do have someone who calls in, I'll just make sure that I reiterate that they can raise their hand on the phone as well, and we'll be able to allow them to ask questions and make comments if they would like to. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and have Dave go ahead and share his screen over mine, and then he can take over the presentation for a little bit. So Dave, whenever you're ready, go ahead and I will let you know once we can see your screen.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Jen. Let's see if this works. Just let me know, can you see the first page yet?
Sometimes on my end, it takes a minute.
Okay.
And I don't see it yet. So it still says I'm sharing, so go ahead and try. I'll go ahead and, oh, there we go. Then it's clicking in.
All
now
right,
it knows what you're trying to do. Yep,
okay.
You got it.
All right.
Perfect.
For some reason it didn't go through the first time. Okay, so thank you, Jen. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Thompson. I'm the lead permit engineer and one of multiple, as Jen said, one of multiple AQD staff involved in the review for the application for the changes at FCA Jefferson North Assembly Plant. For those who have been with us before, some of this presentation will be some of the things that you've heard before, but this is for anyone new. I'm going to start off with an overview of the Air Quality Division and then talk about the proposed project. So we all know that pollution comes from many different things, such as big farms, fuel burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. And the mission of the Air Quality Division is to protect public health and the environment. And the AQD has the authority to do this by regulating industrial sources. So the AQD is separated into different functions. For example, some air quality staff monitor levels of air pollutants. Other staff look at different toxics to make sure public health is protected. The AQD conducts inspections of regulated facilities, certain people, mostly in the district inspectors, and we review permit applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to ensure that the operations comply with our rules and regulations. So the Air Quality Division has the authority to permit sources of air pollutants. However, I do want to point out a few items that the draft permit does not cover and that the AQD does not have the ability to regulate. You will want to talk to your local government if you have questions or concerns about issues such as zoning, noise, and traffic. Excuse me. Next, for those who haven't seen this before, I'm going to give a simplified overview of the steps that the AQD and the applicant go through to get a proposed draft permit ready for comment. First, the applicant plans the project, then subsequently a permit application is submitted to the AQD. The application is reviewed. Once a proposed draft permit is peer reviewed and approved by a supervisor, it is sent to the company for review and posted for public comment. Comments received during the public comment period are evaluated and can potentially lead to changes in the proposed permit. And finally, a decision is made on the permit, and that decision can be one of three things. It can be approved with changes, and it can be denied. Next, I'm going to walk through the proposed permit. One thing that I would like to note is that, although there has been a merger and the new company created is known as, I believe the pronunciation is Stellantis, the plants in the state of Michigan are continuing to operate under the name FCA. Therefore, the draft permit continues to have FCA as the facility name, and even if the facilities were to change names in the future, the permits would still remain active. So the operations at JNAP, the facility that we're looking at, Jefferson North Assembly Plant, consists of an automotive assembly line. Now, an automotive assembly line consists of three main portions. There is a body shop for assembly of the unpainted vehicle, a paint shop where various paints and other materials are applied, and the assembly area where operations such as glass installation, engine installation, and tires are performed. So what is FCA requesting? So overall, FCA is proposing to install a new coating operation, move an existing repair operation, and do some refurbishments and upgrades to existing operations, some existing processes at JNAP. So while reviewing a proposed project, the AQD looks at a number of items. The AQD reviews the level of emissions to figure out how that project should be classified. Based on the level of emissions and the type of equipment, it's determined what type of review is needed, and including which rules and regulations that project is subject to. Now, the application addresses specific state and federal regulations, whether it applies to the proposed project, and how the project would comply with each applicable regulation. Now, throughout the review process and during development of the proposed draft permit, the AQD has ensured that the applicable state and federal rules have been met. Now, one part of figuring out whether specific rules are applicable to a project is the location of the facility. Now, this map shows the current attainment status for the state of Michigan. An area is considered to be in non-attainment if air concentrations of certain pollutants are above the national standards. Michigan currently has non-attainment areas for two pollutants, which are ozone and sulfur dioxide, which is also known as SO2. Now, JNAP is located in an area that is considered in non-attainment for ozone. And ozone is regulated through two other pollutants, which are known as volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and oxides of nitrogen, which is commonly referred to as NOx. If the emissions increase from a project for either of these pollutants is high enough, then that pollutant needs to go through what is called a non-attainment permit review. The application addressed non-attainment permit review through a process called an applicability analysis. Now, through this analysis, it was determined that the JNAP project is not subject to non-attainment permit review. However, the project is still subject to other applicable rules and regulations. For example, the project must show that it would comply with State of Michigan Rule 702 for VOCs. This review is based on what is referred to as a best available control technology, or BACT analysis. And as a result of the BACT review for the project, VOCs from the proposed new coating operation would be controlled by thermal oxidizers. In addition, the application review showed that the compounds emitted from the project would meet their health-based screening levels. Particulate systems would be required on spray coating processes. And in addition, computer simulations, which are commonly known as modeling, were performed for NOx and two forms of particulate matter. There's that with two different sizes, one with diameters of less than 10 microns, which is known as PM10, and particulate matter of less than 2.5 microns, which is commonly referred to as PM2.5. Now, the modeling analyses showed that no violation of any national standard is expected from the project. Excuse me. Now, the proposed project went through the public comment process last year, as Jen noted earlier. So why is there another one? There have been changes to the proposed project and draft permit that the AQD wanted the public to know about. First, there have been updated permit conditions for some existing equipment that make it clear when existing control equipment must be operated during certain operations. Second, as I mentioned earlier, the application included an applicability analysis for the project. Because of the type of analysis that was done, additional record keeping and reporting is required. Lastly, the previous draft permit was written such that the lowering of one of the limits, which is we call the pounds of VOC per job emission limit, would happen immediately after updated equipment is installed and the facility restarts. After further discussion with AQD, FCA has submitted additional data and proposed a step down of the pound per job limit over the course of 12 months. The tons per year emission limit for VOCs will still be reduced after updated equipment is installed, but the pound per job limit would remain at 4.8 pounds per job for the first 6 months, would then lower to 4.6 for months 7 through 12, and lower again to 4.4 starting in the 13th month. Now, there are multiple reasons that the step down in the pounds of VOC per job emission limit was requested. This emission limit is based on both emissions and how many cars are made at JNAP, or vehicles. While installing new equipment and during the first few months after restarting the assembly line, there will be emissions from operations such as cleaning and testing of updated equipment, but there will only be a small number of vehicles being made. And a saleable vehicle is considered to be a job for the context of the emission limit. Excuse me. There are also normal changes in the actual pound per job value based on how the facility operates over the course of a year. There may be more cleaning required or more cars that need to be repainted in one time period versus another. Over the course of time, these differences even out, but they could result in higher pound per job values over a shorter time period. So even though the total emissions in terms of pounds or tons would be relatively low as compared to normal operation during the installation of new equipment and during the restart, the pound per job value we talked about on the last slide would be high during this transition. And this will raise the 12-month rolling total because historic data is included in that emissions, or included in that value. So just to go a little more explanation, but when I mean a 12-month rolling limit. So what is a 12-month rolling time period? So a 12-month rolling is a concept in air permitting, which is a little hard to visualize, and we use this instead of a calendar year. So emissions are always calculated based on the last 12 months, 12-month chunk of time. So this is an example of that. If the permit was issued today, the emissions of volatile organic compounds would be calculated, or really for any 12-month rolling time period. If we're calculating emissions for example, March of 2021, we would look at the 12 months previous, or it would be April of 2020 to March of 2021. We then move into April, and then when emissions for April of 2021 are calculated, they would then be based on the 12 months previous to that, or it would be May of 2020 to April of 2021. And this continues each month. We drop off the month at the end and pick up the subsequent month on the front end. So that's basically a quick explanation of how a 12-month rolling time period works. So basically, after reviewing the additional data submitted associated with the request for the step down, the AQD has determined that the step down of the pounds of VOC per job emission limit is acceptable, but the lower ton per year limits would still become active immediately after updated equipment is installed and the facility is restarted. I apologize. So, sorry about that. So if the permit is approved, FCA would have to comply with all final conditions that have incorporated the review of the state and federal regulations. And based on the review performed, the final conditions, draft conditions for the proposed permit contain emission limits for the pollutants listed here. I'm going to go through them. So there's VOCs, particulate matter, which is known as PM, PM10, PM2.5, NOx, SO2, and carbon monoxide, which is known as CO. There are also limits on natural gas usage. Now, the proposed draft permit also contains testing, monitoring, and record-keeping requirements that would be used to show that JNAP meets its emission limits. And the combination of the emission limits and the testing, monitoring, and record-keeping requirements would ensure that JNAP complies with the rules and regulations. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'll give control back to Jen, and we will continue with the question and answer portion of the night.
Thanks, Dave, for doing that. I know a lot of those concepts are a little bit challenging. So we were hoping that we could at least give you a little bit of a visual cue on how you could think about some of the new things that had been added into the proposed permit. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. So I want to just go over how we're going to do the question and answer, and then, a couple of other just tips and tidbits here. So if my panelists can turn your screens back on, or your videos back on, don't turn your screens back on, your videos back on, we'll get ready to roll here. So just as a reminder, if you have questions, go ahead and enter those in the question box. That's, perfectly acceptable way, and sometimes easier for us to get to your question. And then also just remember that, because once we get to the public comment period, if you want to type your comment in, you'll be using that same thing. I see that we do already have a hand raised, so great. We can also have those hands raised and call on folks to ask questions verbally. I just want to check and make sure I don't have anybody who's calling in on the phone here before we get started, but I'll keep an eye on that. And then if we do have anybody who calls in, I'll make sure that I let them know how to ask their question that way if they would like to. So just as a reminder, here are the folks that we have on our panel. I'm just going to leave this up while we do our question and answer portion tonight, just so that you guys can kind of put faces with names, etc. All right, so Greg, I am going to unmute you here, allow you to talk. Sometimes this is challenging too, so hopefully it works out for you and you can actually talk. So hold on one second. You should be able to unmute yourself now and go ahead and ask your question of the group.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Perfect. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So I have a lot of questions, and I might, if possible, I might come back around to them. But the first question I had was really about reporting and, I guess, monitoring. I'm concerned because I would like to know, like, how frequently these numbers are being shared with Eagle from FCA, what that looks like as far as like how that is monitored. And I'm also getting my head around this idea of per job emissions and wondering what that means for production, right? So if there is an increase in production, if the new Jeep Cherokees are super popular and they're just coming off the line like crazy, if FCA is successful, doesn't that make our families more vulnerable to VOCs?
So I like those two questions. Those are great starting points. We'll answer those first, the first one, and then the second one, and then we'll see if anybody else has questions, and we'll come back to you. Does that sound all right to you, Greg?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the first question I want to have answered is, Dave, I would like you to please talk about what the monitoring and record keeping requirements look like in this proposed permits, particularly if you could focus on how often those records have to be kept. And then Bob, I'm going to pass it back over to you afterwards, just so that you're prepared. Maybe you can talk a little bit about those Title V requirements and how you kind of do your inspections and look at those records. And then we'll get to the second question that Greg asked. But Dave, if you could go ahead and handle that first part first, that would be awesome.
Sure. With regards to the record keeping and monitoring, basically the record keeping is on a monthly basis. They have to record, all of their data, put it into have that available to us. Now we can ask that at pretty much any time, but they do keep it on a monthly basis and keep it on site for 5 years, I believe. And then they are required to submit a report. I believe it is on a quarterly basis. When it goes over to Bob, he will verify it. I believe that it is on a quarterly basis. The data is sent over to for review review and verification for that. So basically monthly they record it as they go in order to, but the official requirements in the permit is every month they record the emissions, and then it is subsequently, I believe, reported or submitted in a report on a quarterly basis to the AQD.
Yeah, so Bob, if you want to talk a little bit about those reports and your review of them, that would be awesome.
Sure, yeah. So on a quarterly basis, we get an emission report on the facility of the actual emissions for VOCs, PM, PM10, PM2.5, NOx, CO. And so every quarter we get a summary of those emission rates. We get a summary of the pounds of VOC per job or vehicle produced. And that data is reviewed and entered into our database here in Eagle. As part of those reports, they include, a lot of information about the emissions and whether they're under their limits or not. Now, the Title V permit that Jen had mentioned earlier will also be submitted every 6 months, and that will detail if they've had any sort of deviation from any permit condition within their ROP. So not only do we get quarterly emission reports on emissions, we also get semi-annual reports on any deviation that would occur at the facility for any permit condition. As far as abatement equipment type of monitoring, they monitor the combustion chamber temperature of the thermal oxidizers on a continuous basis. And by continuous basis, we mean a minimum of once every 15 minutes. The desorption gas inlet temperature for the concentrators is also monitored on a continuous or every 15-minute basis. And they also conduct bypass monitoring of the control or abatement equipment as well. Because of the volume of that data, it is not submitted to us, but they, again, have to certify compliance that all that criteria has been met every 6 months. And if they do fall out of that criteria, they are required to report it to us.
So that's a lot. I know they have to do a lot of monitoring and reporting, and we had a couple like follow-up questions to when you two were talking. So I just want to touch on those really briefly. So one of the questions was, can the reports and monitoring data be made easily accessible by community members? That is a great question, and that would be awesome. Unfortunately, we do not have an easy way to do that. We have a lot of information on FCA and all the other facilities in the state that we regulate online, but that detail of information, we're working on ways to get some of that online easier. So if you were really interested in it, would be something that you'd have to submit a Freedom of Information Act request, and I can help you do that if you're very interested in that at any time. And I can also help show you, what is available online that you can access really easily, because there is a lot on there, but that super refined detail that Bob was discussing is not necessarily readily available on there. And then Greg, you typed in a question as a follow-up to what Bob said, saying like, what is an ROP? So we could definitely have a whole meeting on what is an ROP, what is a Title V permit, but so I'm going to try to simplify it a little bit. Basically what an ROP or a Title V permit does is it takes kind of all these sort of process-specific air permits that FCA has, and it houses them in one document. That document has, again, like Bob said, additional record keeping and reporting requirements above and beyond what's even in these proposed permits. So it's something that larger emitters have to have, and it's a very stringent way of us looking at them. We have a lot more required inspections and like deviation reports and reporting that the company has to do. Again, probably not perfect, but simplified version of that. Definitely ask a follow-up if you have one on that. But I do want to get to this concept of pound per job. I know we did not talk about that at the last public meeting. It is kind of an interesting concept. So I'm going to let Dave talk a little bit about this, but I guess how I understand that, or how I would translate that information, is basically that this proposed permit not only has a pound per job limit, it has all these other limits in it as well. And the company is required to meet all of the limits. They don't just get to pick and choose, well, we're going to meet this pound per job limit, or we're going to meet this 12-month rolling limit. It's something that they have to meet all of those limits. So although you're right in concept when you say that more cars equals more emissions, true, but still this permit was looked at, like I said, or like Dave said earlier, with all of those restrictions in mind and all those rules and regulations that apply. So Dave, I don't know if you want to add a little bit more to that. I know that is like kind of a challenging concept that we had even talked about internally. What does that mean? But hopefully I captured that. Please correct me if I'm wrong though.
No, it wasn't. It is kind of a conceptually, it's a little hard to grasp. So basically, as the vehicle goes through an assembly line or an assembly process, there are certain materials that are added, and the majority of it comes from the paint shop. Where paint is applied, there's different levels of paint, there's different types of things. There's a certain amount of VOCs that are added to that. And what has this type of permitting takes basically all of the emissions that are taken from an automobile going through the line, and it becomes basically, here's how many pounds of VOC you can do for a particular car, and it is an average. So basically the cars go through, you have so many cars that can go through. They have, they have to, when everything comes down to it, and they see how many VOCs are emitted and how many automobiles they produce, there's a particular pound per job that they have. In addition to that, there's also an actual mass limit that they can have, and those are maximums. So no matter how popular it gets, they are only allowed to emit up to a certain amount per rolling time period. Now that pound per job, so basically they have multiple limits. They have so much per job, and they have so much for and they have so much for total for a rolling 12-month. So there's two limits just specifically for VOCs. There's two limits that they have to meet. There's the tons per year, and then there's the pounds per job. I don't know if that made it more confusing, but I was trying to add a little more conceptually on what it actually means, but I might have gone off a little more detail on this.
So Greg had a follow-up to that, and maybe this will help too. And then I see that Kia Mathis has their hand up, so I'm going to get to you in just a second. But so is one of the permit conditions to monitor the number of jobs or the number of cars coming off the line? That's correct, right? Yes.
Yes.
So that'll help. And so what that does for us, Greg, actually is when Bob is looking at all of the record keeping information, he can recalculate FCA's numbers if he needs to, and just kind of verify. So it's just like that, having those kind of conditions. So it's a really good point that you brought up, just brings more checks and balances into the proposed permit for our staff to look at. So we can just ensure that compliance is being met or not, as the case may be. So Kia, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can ask a question here. And you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question if you would like to. All right, try it one more time here, because I can't unmute you. So we might have to go to the old-fashioned way of typing the question in, and I greatly apologize for that if you have to do that. But go ahead, and I'm going to try one more time to allow you to talk if you would like to. All right. I know sometimes this is challenging, and sometimes it's just a matter of, how your thing is set up. My head, I can't be without my headset, or nobody would be able to hear me, which might be a good thing for all of you. I don't know. So if you have a question, I again apologize for that. I'm going to just ask you to type it into the question box if you don't mind. I'm going to go ahead and allow Theo Pride to talk. He had a question. So Theo, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can. Perfect.
Good,
Thank
good.
you.
I actually have a comment and not a question.
So is this a comment that you would like to put on the record, or is this a comment you just would like to make now?
Just a comment on the record, absolutely.
So, all right,
yeah.
Hold on one second, because if it's a comment on the record, and I'm sorry if this is confusing, because sometimes it is, I just want to make sure that if you want to make that comment on the record for the decision maker to consider when making the decision, then you might want to hold it until the public hearing portion that starts at 7. And maybe you weren't on yet when we talked about that. So either way, you can say it now or then, but if you say it at 7-ish or a little after, then it will go officially on the record for consideration.
Let's wait till 7 then.
Okay, that sounds great. We can definitely do that. So again, I apologize if that was confusing, but I appreciate it. Now you can raise your hand and unmute yourself, so that's helpful. All right. So we had a question here. And Dave, this is going to go to you. So the question is, does this permit to install reduce the allowable VOCs from the JNAP facility on a ton per year basis? It looks like the FG facility VOC limit drops to 995 tons per year from 1,085.8. So is that a valid assumption?
Yes, it is. There's various processes going on that are going to increase the efficiency of some portions of it. So even though they are putting in a new coding line overall at, at the end of the process, once this updated equipment is installed, it will be more efficient for, applying materials to the automobile, and it will result in lower VOCs on both a per car and on a tons per year basis.
All right, so Greg, I see you have your hand up again. So since I don't have any other hands up or any other questions in, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to ask another question. So you should be able to talk. It looks like you're unmuted, so go ahead and try.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
There you go. No,
Okay,
you're fine.
thanks. So I guess I have a couple of follow-up questions around the reporting and the monitoring. And I know that it was mentioned that these are, we're talking about actuals, right? This is not based on modeling, and that's kind of like a first question. But I was wondering where these numbers or where this data is taken from. Now, is this something that is like on the line where there are like monitors that are picking up fumes or something like this, or is it something that's on the stack, or is it somehow, how are they getting these numbers? I'm sorry if I'm not articulating that.
No, I think you're asking, how are they calculating the emissions? Is that correct?
Yeah, and specifically, I guess, like where they're monitoring stuff. Is this stuff that they're monitoring inside of the plant? Is it on the stack? Is it outside of the plant? Like, is it where the emissions are coming out? Or is it something that's monitored like on the line?
So I think that may be a terminology issue a little bit, because when we say monitoring, we don't necessarily equate that to measuring. Monitoring is sometimes monitoring, like Bob had spoken of earlier, when a temperature is being monitored on a continuous basis. So that is kind of a measurement, but it's not like an emissions measurement. So Dave, if you don't mind, if you can talk about any, because I'm just not remembering off the top of my head, if there is any exact emissions monitoring that is done, measuring, I guess. And if not, if you could talk a little bit about how those emissions are calculated, since they would be considered actual emissions, how would we expect the company to be looking at those?
Sure. Well, the monitoring that is done, as Bob Burns said earlier, is more on how the equipment is operating. The numbers are obtained based off of usage of different varying materials. It has a certain amount of, say, VOCs, or mainly VOCs that are applied. They take that usage, and there is a certain control efficiency, control factors that are established for the control equipment. As it goes through, it is taken through. They were required to test to verify all of these variables, these different efficiencies, such as how well VOCs are taken to the oxidizers, how well the oxidizer controls the VOCs that are introduced to it. And that is how the VOC numbers, that's how the VOC numbers are gotten. There are some various other ways for some of the other pollutants, such as they keep track of how much natural gas is used at the plant, and that's used for other variable or other pollutants. It gets reasonably complicated, but it's mostly based off of usage of materials. And Bob, I guess Bob Burns, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, like Dave was saying, they basically, keep a material identification of anything that's used at the facility. And so whether it's a sealer, some adhesive, or a gallon of paint, they know how much of each material that they're using. They know, for instance, what the VOC emission rate is for that amount of material that's been applied. And then they have the control factors for those processes that go through abatement equipment, such as a concentrator or a regenerative thermal oxidizer. And it's a combination of the record of the material used, its VOC content, and the efficiency of the abatement equipment, which then determines the emissions for VOCs, for instance, at this facility.
So is there any stack testing that's required in this proposed permit? Would there be any stack testing, destruction efficiency, control efficiency, anything like that that's detailed in that? Dave, could you talk a little bit about that if there is?
Yeah, there's multiple stack tests that are going to have to be done, and they're going to have to test, for example, destruction efficiency on the RTO, on the oxidizers.
But you
And
need to say what destruction efficiency is first.
Yep, I'm going to go through destruction
Thank you.
efficiency. I'm going to go through that. Destruction efficiency is basically, like I said, the VOCs go into the oxidizer, it gets burned up in the oxidizer, and not every guy, no oxidizer is 100% efficient. And no oxidizer is going to burn every VOC that goes into it. So a destruction efficiency test measures how much is going in and how much is coming out during normal operation. And the reduction from what is going into what is coming out is called the destruction efficiency. So that's one test that is involved in that does measure, there's measurements done on both the stack and in the intro to the oxidizer for that. There's also other tests that are going to be done throughout the year, something referred to as capture efficiency there's a number of different pieces of equipment, and there is testing done on each piece of control equipment, or on each piece of VOC control equipment that's in there. And there's also particulate testing done, NOx testing that's going to be required on certain stacks in addition to that VOC, and that's measuring actual emissions from those stacks.
All right, thanks for detailing that out a little bit. So we did have a question from Robert Shobe on this, and this is always a tough one for us to get asked, but it's not really a tough one for us to answer. I think it's important. So the question, and Dave, I'm going to give this to you because you were the permit engineer on this, and I know that you were very conscientious about all the rules and regulations that we looked at. And when Jay spoke earlier about how we really do write these permits with the environment and human health in mind, and we do the best that we can to make sure that anything that's proposed would meet those standards. So the question is, would any of you feel safe living next to this site? So I don't know if there's anything that you can add to that, Dave, but I would appreciate it if you would do that.
Sure. Well, just to there is a large amount of analysis that goes into this. There is modeling performed on, as I said, it was performed on NOx emissions, on two different sizes of particulate matter. The evaluation for individual, we reviewed individual emissions of specific compounds that are emitted from the process, and those are all, they've all been found to be below all of the health-based, basically there's standards that are out there, and they've all been found to be below that standard. So I would say yes, I would feel safe living in the area, because especially the modeling portion does incorporate a lot of the other things. It does incorporate some of these, basically everything from the plant.
When we talk about modeling, what we're talking about is the review that Steph did a while back when we did the first one, where we look at, what those impacts are expected to be in the surrounding communities. And that's another test basically that we put the proposed permit through before we can even put it out to comment like we are tonight. This question came in, and I think I know what it's asking. And the question is, and I'm going to paraphrase this, so if I don't get to it, please let me know. But the question is there already a building for the proposed coating line to be built in? And if there isn't, is that land already owned by FCA or not? So I don't know if you know that, Dave, or not, if you could speak to that.
For this one, they have there is a building bump out that is in the plan, but my understanding, the coating line is going into an existing spot in the facility, and the bump out, my understanding is that there's no additional land needed for this particular project.
Okay, thank you. All right, Greg, I know you have your hand up again, so if you want to go ahead and ask another question, feel free to do that.
Great, I appreciate it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so um, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff coming up here, but the thing that came up for me this time was like in discussing the oxidizers, right? And this destruction process. The question that I have is, and you know, are the oxidizers and this technology that they're using, is it the best that they can use? Would it be possible for them to further reduce these emissions, the VOCs that are getting in my kids' lungs, by using better equipment, by using better oxidizers? Like, I just, is it possible for them to improve this further? Thank you.
Yeah, Dave, would you like to talk about that a little bit?
The oxidizer are typically considered the most effective control equipment for VOCs. They are, so I guess in short answer, this is typically considered to be the best control for VOCs when it comes to typical types of control equipment. There are others available, but they don't tend to control at such as good of an efficiency, which is why it typically goes over to oxidizers for this purpose, for the control of volatile organic compounds. That's usually an oxidation process of some type.
I mean, the idea here that I'm trying to get at is, so I feel like with the tax incentive used, with the public funding that FCA is receiving to make this all happen, are they using the best equipment that they could to protect us the most we could? We're putting tax money into this. They're capturing taxes from our schools. They're capturing taxes from going into services that we need in the neighborhood. And I think it's our right to know if FCA could do better by us, since they're using all of our tax money.
Dave, I don't know if you want to, if there's anything else that you can add about other types of control technology out there. And I know, Greg, this probably is not the answer that you want, but just going back to what we kind of talk about at the beginning of the presentation, and it's, you know, FCA comes to air quality with their proposal. So obviously we push as much as we can to make sure that everything is meeting every limit that we can ask them to meet, and that they're doing everything that they can, and we have as much record keeping, monitoring, and reporting as we possibly can. I don't know personally if there would be something better, more efficient. Could they tighten their belt a little bit more? I mean, that's a question that it certainly could be a comment that you make during the comment period. It might be something even, and Dave, you can correct me here for sure in a second, that we might have to look into. But I don't know that we could require it, I guess, is because I think that's where you're going with that, is could we require them to do more? And I don't know that we could. So I don't know, Dave, can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm not sure if I'm articulating it quite the way I want to on that. But I think I'm getting to your point there, Greg. And I think I'm capturing what you're asking.
Yeah, well, the control equipment itself, that is the highest percentage of that is the best controlling technology for VOCs that is out there, really, in terms of how they are. It is considered, you know, as I said earlier, it is it's subject to Rule 702, you know, best available control technology. Through that review and through the review of the rules and regulations, this was reached as the best available control technology for this process and for this facility. And the oxidizers for the control equipment, that is the best efficiency. It reaches, you know, the minimum of 95% control efficiency, or I mean destruction efficiency, excuse me, for when the VOCs are put in there. But this was reached through the rules and regulations that were applicable to this project, and it is the oxidizers.
And there is stack testing associated with that to prove that destruction efficiency.
Yes,
and I
yeah,
think the proposed permit does say it must meet 95% or greater destruction in the stack test. I could be wrong about that. I could be misremembering. So
No,
I apologize if I am, but typically when we see companies like FCA or other companies that have a lot of volatile organic compounds going to their control equipment, we see higher than 95% destruction in general. So in any stack test that we do, we should say that those are available to the public as well. We do put those online. So once those stack tests are complete, that information is publicly available. So we do put those stack tests on, like you wouldn't have to FOIA, I guess is what I'm saying with that. You wouldn't have to submit a Freedom of Information Act request to get those stack test reports. So it's definitely something that we put out there. And again, often we see those meeting higher than that 95% minimum that we require. And if for some reason they weren't, then Bob would be probably writing a violation notice and the company would be taking further compliance action. So it's a pretty serious condition that we put in there for a very good reason, just to getting back to, what you've been mentioning throughout the evening here, Greg, about, wanting to make sure that those VOCs are as limited as possible when they're exiting the facility, and that they're, meeting those health-based standards to ensure that your family is protected and the community is protected. I know we're getting close to 7 here, and we're going to be shifting over to that public hearing portion of the evening. So I'll give you guys a couple minute break here, not break, but a little bit of a pause, a breather, as we kind of shift over to that. Oh, I see that Ben Fung has a question and has their hand up. So Ben, hold on one second. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question, unless you want to make a comment for the record. So, all right, see if you can unmute yourself there. I know we've succeeded with you before unmuting, so let's see if we can get your question answered for you.
Thanks for taking.
Yeah, there you go. We can hear you.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. The question I have is when you say 95% efficiency, which is very impressive to audience, but even with 5% emission from the stack, and since residents at Beneteau, we are living right next door to it. Versus, if we live, let's say, if we live about maybe a mile away or something like that, with 5% emission, I think we'll give some time for further oxidation process happen down the stream. But since we are living right next door to it, and a lot of these Beneteau's residents, we are just like right next to the plant, and so 5% is still quite a significant damage to our health if we're not careful. And just like for myself, my house doesn't have really good insulation. We still have leaks on the wall. We still have wooden sash window leaking. And right now, even 5%, and you can see that the impact is quite significant. So that's why we've been talking to the city council and all the way to FCA, and we say that we need a buffer zone from the plant, and nobody has ever listened. And now we just live right next door to it, and the residents start to see the impact. Even the plant is not being open right now, and you talk about noise, you talk about dust, you talk about light, you talking about a lot of things. And even with the railroad, is the train coming in right now, it will block all the traffic, and we have to drive downstream and upstream about miles and miles away before we can cross the railroad track. So it's a lot of things that accumulated, and then we start to see it happen right now. And thanks for the information. 95%, it sounds like impressive, but it's, To us, the respiratory diseases for our zip code for 8214 is a very high, and a lot of people have respiratory diseases even when the old plant was far away. And now we're talking about the plant expanding all the way up next door to us. So there's no reason to believe that this equipment is going to be any helpful, any further reduction from previously published data. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ben. And, you know, I know that was a comment more than a question at this point. And just remember that the public hearing, we haven't quite started that yet. So I guess if I just want to remind you, if you would like to make that comment again during the comment period, when we actually get to that in just a minute here, that might be a good idea. It's totally up to you, but just to let you know, I appreciate that you making that comment right now for sure. And that being said, we are going to go over to our public hearing portion of the night here. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. All right, just one second, and I'm going to. All right, so this is going to be starting our public hearing portion. So just as a reminder, we can kind of do the same thing with this. If you guys would like to write in a comment, and I'll talk about this again in a minute. You're just going to want to write the word comment in the question and answer so I know that it's a comment, and I will read that out loud for the record. Even if you don't want me to read it out loud, you can say do not read. And again, I'll go over this again in just a minute. And I won't read it out loud, but it will still be counted as a comment on the record. You'll be able to raise your hand, and I'll do my best to, call on you in the order that you raised your hand, but we'll get to it in just a minute. That is kind of challenging. So if my panelists would like to turn their video cameras off, thank you guys again for participating in that portion. Greatly appreciate it. Jay, if you want to get your camera on, because you are the decision maker on this. So what happens now is I have to read an opening statement to you all, just officially opening the comment period. So I'm going to do that, and I apologize that this is a little bit dry and a little bit boring, but here we go. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I'm with the Environmental Support Division of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE. I will be the hearing officer tonight. We have Jay Oligar, Assistant Division Director for the Air Quality Division, the decision maker for this permit action, and he's listening in on the hearing tonight. This hearing is for the proposed permit to install for the proposed installation of a new coating line and changes to existing equipment at FCA Jefferson North Assembly Plant, hereinafter FCA JNAP, located in Detroit, Michigan. I have some background information to share with all of you before we begin the official hearing. So the Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse effects on public health and the environment. The law governing these responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in the proposed air permit an opportunity to provide information the department may use in deciding whether to approve the permit to install, or if there are additional issues to consider. Please note the proposed permit to install is still a draft permit. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permit available will help you in providing comments. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether the permit will be granted at all. Please recognize the department can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria the department must use in making a decision. For example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within the department's authority. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition to the proposed project. We will be happy to make note of your position, but please understand the department is by law not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed air permit. The hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information the department will consider in making its decision on the proposed air permit. The public comment period for the proposed permit began February 10, 2021, and will end at midnight on March 26, 2021. Additional information may be submitted through that time. After the close of the public comment period, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision on the proposed air permit will be made. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reasons for the change. In all three of these scenarios, all interested parties, including anyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. This notification will include a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. As stated previously, you may submit a written comment at any time to the email address we will provide later. You may also type the word comment into your question box and submit your comment in writing. I will read aloud all comments you submit via the question box unless you state do not read. If you would like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I will unmute your line so you can speak. We will limit your comment time to 3 minutes. If you are speaking, I will try to let you know the best I can when you have 30 seconds left. I'll do my best to address commenters in the order your hands were raised, but please bear with us as the technology does have challenges for that. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed air permit and to listen to those comments. Thank you so much for your attention. I will now begin calling the names of those who have indicated they would like to make a statement. So I do have some folks with their hands raised, and Greg, okay, you did put your hand down a minute, but you might want to raise it again later. So Ben, I'm going to go ahead and since we just had you unmuted, and if you'd like to make a comment, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and go ahead and make your comment whenever you're ready. If you want to just state your name for the record, that would be great.
Yeah, my name is Ben Fang. I'm a resident at Benito Street. My comment is just like previously stated that 95% efficiency at the source is not sufficient because there's still 5% is emitted from the stack. And Benito resident, we live right next door to it. Before the plant was far away, and now we looking at the plant is right next to us. 5% is unacceptable, and I would recommend to relocate this facility to a remote place where no residents is around, and that's the best solution for it. But right now it's right next to the residents, and we don't have any buffer zone or anything to protect us. So it's very dangerous. And right now with the COVID that's going on right now, most of the residents at on Benito Street, many of us have respiratory diseases, and respiratory diseases are prone to have any COVID-19. So I would strongly oppose to the proposal right now.
Thank you, Mr. Fang, so much for your comment. All right, Theo Pride, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so that you can make your comment for the record. You should be able to unmute your mic and go ahead with your comment whenever you're ready.
Yes, my name is Theo Pride, and I'd like to make a comment in regards to the lack of environmental protections and data monitoring in the impact zone, particularly in the Benito neighborhood, which is directly adjacent to the development. These residents are extremely vulnerable to any decline in air quality. Thus, the state should be making sure everything that can be done to ensure a healthy, breathable, and livable neighborhood is done. And one thing they could do is make sure the regulation process is airtight and up to par. I would urge that the state require FCA to continue to improve source monitoring and require additional record keeping from FCA. I'd also ask that the data and other data be made accessible to residents so that they can monitor their air quality real time through a web portal or some type of easy to use app. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pride. We really appreciate your comment. Senator Chang, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can make a comment if you'd like. You should be able to go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, sounds good. And forgive me for children chatter in the back. Hold on, Sonia. Hi, everyone. Thanks to Eagle for doing this public hearing. And also, I appreciate you very much for extending the comment deadline. So thank you for that. I wanted to echo some of the comments of the residents who I want to thank for being on, because I know, it's just so important that residents' voices are heard in all of these processes. So thank you to every resident who's on. I just want to echo some of the concerns that have been raised regarding air quality and regarding the lack of protections. While we acknowledge that there, have been some things that have been done, and with the community benefits process, there was a lot that wasn't quite done. And so, there's still a need to ensure that indoor air quality within our schools, when kids go back, and also in vulnerable populations, and even in the homes that are very close to the facility, we need to make sure that those are being prioritized. Hold on, Sonia. And also, I think it's also really, really important to make sure that we are doing as solid air monitoring as possible, to make sure that we have really good data, and also to make sure that all of that data is publicly available and very transparent. So just to reiterate, the air monitoring piece needs to be really, really highlighted. And then also, I think we do need to do more in terms of ensuring that the company and the city and the others involved all really prioritize air filtration systems and other types of protections for the residents, especially vulnerable residents. The last thing I will say is just echoing, while I know that this isn't necessarily to do with the air quality permit, since this is an Eagle hearing, just want to point out that I think that there is continuing concern regarding truck emissions. And so that's something that I hope that we can all take a look at and really make sure that we're coming up with good solutions on that front. So thank you again for holding this hearing. Thanks to all the residents, and I'll submit some public comment in writing in the next few days.
Thank you so much, Senator Chang. We really appreciate you being on with us and making your comment tonight. I'm going to shift over to Sana Green. Sana, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can make your comment whenever you're ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
We sure can. Go right ahead.
This is Sana Green, and I live in near the factory in Jefferson Chalmers. And I've been very concerned about the factory expanding because I already have respiratory issues. And so any increase in pollution will directly impact my ability to breathe. I'm sure I'm not the only person who has this issue. I was not able to ask questions while I was during the question and answer session because I was driving, but I do have these questions as follow-up to some of the information that was presented. When last, I guess 2 years ago, when the questions about the FCA factory were being posed, it was said that the company would not have to monitor emissions for a year after being opened, and I think that could be an issue. And I have a concern about the cumulative effect over the 12-month period. I couldn't really quite understand how that whole job thing works, because it's conceivable that the factory could overpollute for 3 months, not pollute or not paint any cars for 2 months, and then overpollute for another 5 months and still be within that 12-month period. So I would really like to know how we can monitor that specifically. I agree that we definitely need to have access to all of the monitoring that's done, and it would be really wonderful if the state could set up monitors for the community so that we can also monitor, because it's in other parts of the city, the corporations were overpolluting, and it had to be the citizens who actually let the state know that overpollution was happening, or just like when the incinerator was burning when it wasn't supposed to be. We really need to make sure that all of the schools that are near the factory have filtration systems to help the air quality inside of the schools, especially on days when there's painting. I wonder also if FCA could not consider using powder paint, which has significantly fewer VOCs. Since this is a new factory, it would be great to utilize the same system that Chrysler uses in Portugal, and it would make our air cleaner. And those are my comments.
Thank you so much, Ms. Green. We really appreciate you taking the time today to ask those questions and provide your comments. So Jerry King, I see that you typed in a comment and I can go ahead and read that, or I can unmute you if you would like to read out loud. So I'm just going to ask you what you would prefer to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And if you want me to read your comment, I'm more than happy to do that. Or if you would like to speak, you can too. So go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, greetings everyone. Jerry King. I had the privilege to serve the community on the NAC for this project. And I have some concerns, over a period of time. It really became aware that this wasn't an apple to apple situation. You're tearing down one assembly plant, bringing up another one, and that basically the processes were going to be, similar. It was told it's state-of-the-art equipment. And my biggest concern comes from my further evaluation of data from Eagle, which tells me that the overall data, my latest data point was 2018, going back 20 years. And for Jefferson North Assembly, there was about 12,300 tons of VOCs dumped into the community over a 20-year span. The previous plant, Mac Engine, those two, from my understanding, went under one permit for those two plants. And the VOCs from that was only 64 tons over a 20-year cycle, with an average of 3 tons, 3.08 tons. So this is clearly not an apples to apple situation. This expansion is dumping a whole lot more pollutants on those people that live over there on Benetal with this expansion and this change of production. And I understand state-of-the-art equipment is going to mitigate some of this damage. And it's a beautiful thing that over there on the JNAP side, that there's going to be a 10% reduction, but that 10% reduction does not even equate to buffer the damage done by moving, by bringing in this assembly plant. And you're talking, if we say apple to apple, you're talking about another 600 tons a month, well, yearly, to be dumped in that community. Right now, when I look at the paperwork FCA just put out about the reduction, it shows an average of 60 tons a month from JNAP. So we're talking 60 tons from Mac Avenue. If you mitigate that with new equipment, is this equipment capable of even 50% lower reductions than what you have over there at JNAP? I don't even think that's capable. That doesn't even seem realistic. So what is the overall impact on pollution being dumped into this community? Let's talk about apples to apples. I can agree anything reduces better, but there's no reduction happening in this community. There is expansion of VOCs. And can somebody help me clear my data points and make sure that I'm seeing these things if I'm not seeing them correctly?
Does that complete your comment, Mr. King?
Yeah, that's pretty much complete. Those are my concerns of
Okay, thank you.
additionals being dumped into that community. Even though we have some good things happening, we cannot say that we're reducing emissions in that side of the community at all with this expansion. There's a very heavy-handed addition of VOCs. So that's my statement.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you offering that up tonight. Michelle Jackson, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and allow you to make your comment. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
We sure can.
I'm Michelle Jackson, and I too, like Jerry, had the opportunity to serve on the Neighborhood Advisory Council. And I just would like to urge Eagle. I too have asthma. I live in the area. I live down by where the trucks come off of the freeway at 94. We have no buffers down here. It is so much dust coming from the trucks coming off of the freeway. And the emissions that's supposed to be the VOCs, that's supposed to be limited coming from the plant. We would like to see Eagle break that information down for us to let us understand what it is that we see. Because when it talks about the VOC and the tons that are being dumped in our community, some of the folks really don't understand it. One of the things I want Eagle and Mr. J to realize is that You know, you speak about the law doesn't require you guys to take the information, only the information that has to do with the emissions part. But what the law doesn't tell you is that these are human beings that live in this community. These are children that walk in this community. The law doesn't say that these people can breathe freely, because the law does not take into fact that these are humans in this area. So I do urge Eagle to think about what is going on in this area and know that most of the time when things are being done in communities, they happen to be communities of color. So they use the law to hide some of the things that are going on. And the discrimination comes in the form of policies that are written on paper. So you guys are checking on fiat, but you're not checking on the fact that the humans are actually breathing all of this polluted air into their lungs. Again, there are a number of asthma rates in this particular city. And I know for a fact that, well, I don't say I know for a fact because they want to say that things can't be, the community cannot say that it's coming from the plant because of science or whatever it is. But we know here living in this community what is going on. We see it, we feel it, and we breathe it. We breathe this this dust that is coming, or what's going on with this plant. So three shifts back and forth off of the freeway, driving back and forth, up and down, no buffers. We are not able to breathe clean air. This would not happen anywhere else. It would not happen in Auburn Hills. So I urge Eagle to please get the information out, have the monitoring stations, have the people be stewards of what's going on in their community. And remember, this is real. This is lives. So, Mr. J, if you have any children, think about us being children of that. We belong to somebody also, and we have a right to be able to breathe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jackson. Really appreciate your comment. Ken Snap, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you may make your comment. Should be able to go whenever you're ready.
Yes. Just a quick statement, real quick. My name is Ken Snap, running for City Council in District 4, and JNAP will encompass my district. And I just want to piggyback off of Mr. Pride, Mr. Theo Pride, saying that we need to make the data available. Is this something that could be a running tally or a running count or running data that could be displayed by FCA in a display of good hope and goodwill? Like when people have respiratory issues, if something is made known to like the local hospital, local clinic, that the respiratory issues be made known and also part of that running data. It would be good to have a good transparency between them and the people and all over the government with the state, the city, and the county. So if someone, had a asthma attack or something that lived close to the area, could that be noted and made part of the data? That's all I have for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comment. Greg, I see you have your hand up for a comment, so you should be able to just unmute yourself and go ahead and make your comment whenever you're ready.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we sure can. Sorry, I was a little slow there.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And I do appreciate the opportunity for this info session and for residents to make public comment, but each one of the public comments that Eagle has received thus far doesn't live in the vacuum that it appears that Eagle needs to hear public comments in. I've been engaged in this process. I've attended every public hearing that Eagle has hosted and have engaged in any way possible with FCA through the community benefits process and through organizing with my fellow residents and attempting to raise awareness of what's happening here. And it is extremely frustrating to me as a father, as a friend to folks living on Beneteau, that you can't hear what we're saying. You express this caveat before the public hearing begins that eliminates a vast majority of our concerns and the impact. This is a majority Black neighborhood. The people who are living here have been historically abused by the government, by industry, and mistreated. And we need a great paradigm shift. I will submit my public comments around the plant by paper, but here today, I'd like to really address the fact that I feel at the state level, we need a huge paradigm shift if we are going to address the inequities that my neighbors, the residents of the city of Detroit, and other frontline communities are facing. Again, every public comment that has come forward to you has made reference to the state that we are living in and not into this vacuum of what happens in JNAP. We need to consider the cumulative impact. We're not even talking about MAC and JNAP together. We're not addressing the fact that these things really do come together in real life. Like, this is extremely important in the age of Black Lives Matter, in the age of this greater realization of racial injustice. For this to be the state's process is unjust. We need a paradigm shift. We need for Eagle and for the people who are making these decisions to hear us. It's been 2 years. We've been saying the same thing over and over again. My kid just had surgery because of sinus issues. It's extremely personal. You cannot put us in a vacuum. As I said, I will submit my comments pertaining to this tiny little vacuum that FCA and this process are putting us in, and I will put them in paper and I will hand them to you all again. But what we really need to do is to shift out of this mode. We need, and I am requesting that Eagle open this process up so that you can take a look at what's happening. Have we mentioned the asbestos problems and the problems on Beneteau? No, because you've got us locked in this little box of what we can talk about and what you can hear. My kids are up here on the screen. The folks all over this area have kids too, as Michelle said, as Jerry said, as so many of us have come to you every single time you've done this and said, we need you to actually hear us. So my public comment is a plea to Eagle, to Jennifer Granholm, to any of the representatives that we've elected in the state to advocate on the fact that we need a paradigm shift in the way that Eagle and the state hears residents. This cannot stand any longer. That is my public comment. I will leave it there, and I will submit the things that pertain to the vacuum you've created in order to get this through for my in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newsom. I really, truly appreciate your comment tonight. Just looking to see if we have any other hands raised, and I do see Mr. Bomani has his hand raised, so hold on one second and I will unmute you so you may make your comment. Okay, you should be able to make your comment now whenever you would like. Try one more time to unmute yourself, Mr. Bomani.
Okay.
There you go. Now you should be good. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Ani Bomani. I am a candidate for City Council in District 4-2. And consistently, the city, Chrysler, and many of these entities who come into our community under the guise of making it better or bringing money or bringing jobs in, and really it's just under the guise of it's really just gentrification. And consistently, our community, Jefferson Chalmers, we tell the city, we tell these organizations, we tell these entities that we don't want these things in our community, and they still come in and do whatever they want to do. They still come in and pollute. They still come in and uproot people. They still come in and put in things in this community that we do not want, and we tell them we do not want, and they come in anyway and do whatever they want to do. When are the people going to be important? Not big corporations, not Chrysler, not any of these people. When are the people who are living in this community, have children in this community, have been here all their lives for generations? When is their opinions most important? Because apparently it is not important to the people who are coming in like Chrysler, like these people who are big polluters, who have been polluters for years. Why is it? I just don't understand why they consistently do things after the community says we don't want them. Just like these stupid bike lanes. We told them we did not want them, and they're still here. We do not want to be polluted. We do not want to have our children polluted. We do not want the asthma, and we do not want the things that come with these big polluters. We do not want them. We want a real community benefits agreement that is for the good of the people, not the good of big corporations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bomani. I have a comment in the comment box. I'm going to go ahead and read this one aloud. This is from Samara Hill. It says, hello, my name is Samara, and I am a resident of Detroit with friends who live in the affected area. I am asking for EGLE to develop an open data web portal and app that is accessible for residents for real-time monitoring. We need more transparency from FCA. Ms. Hill, thank you so much for your comment. I really appreciate that. I don't have any other comments in the comment box, and I don't have any other hands raised at the moment. So let me just give you guys a couple minutes here to see if anyone would like to make a comment that hasn't already. And then we can end up closing the comment period if you guys are finished. All right, I've got Andrew Gadaris. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you may make your comment. You should be able to unmute yourself and comment whenever you're ready.
Hello, thank you. My name is Andrew Gadaris, and I work for Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. We'll be submitting a written comment for the record from Representative Tlaib, but I just wanted to echo the concerns that we've heard tonight from residents in and around the impact area. I've been working on this issue with a lot of these folks for years now, and we really appreciate the tenacity and the courage of the residents who consistently speak out against a really powerful corporation and a political establishment that has decided that we can do things like trade emissions reductions in white suburbs for emissions increases in Black neighborhoods. And so we'll submit a full comment as we have previously on this permit, but just wanted to express that we hear all the time and have for the last 2 years from residents in the impact area who are really deeply concerned about their health, their well-being, and whether the air permits that are under consideration actually protect their lives. I think it's clear from the comments tonight that nobody in the impact area, nobody in the surrounding area feels like these permits are sufficient to protect their health And I think if public comment is to mean anything, that these the weight of these comments has to be taken seriously and has to be actualized in the decision-making process. So we'll submit a full comment on behalf of Congresswoman Tlaib, but just wanted to thank everybody who was able to make a comment on the record tonight.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gutierrez. Appreciate you making that comment tonight. All right. I think that was the last comment and last hand raised. I just want to double check here. Oh, Ms. Copeland, hold on one second. Let me go ahead and unmute you so you can make your comment. All right, Tina Copeland, if you would like to unmute yourself, and you should be able to comment whenever you're ready.
Hi, yes. I just have a comment. My thing is this: if we're talking about human life here, I'm not clear on why this permit is even being considered. Who cares about the people versus the money that it seemed like it's a money bag? So my comment is that if we're talking about human life here and it being affected by this permit, we shouldn't even be considering it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your comment. All right, I'm just going to check one more time here. Make sure I'm not missing anyone. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read the closing statement. So that will officially close the public comment period. We do have a couple other things that we want to talk to you about after the public comment period is closed. So if you can stay on the line, we'd really appreciate your attention just for a couple more minutes. So just to officially close the hearing, thank you for taking time to participate in this meeting tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on March 26, 2021. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed. Thank you again. All right, so with that closing, again, really appreciate everybody taking the time to attend the meeting tonight. You know, as Jay said earlier, we know that you have other things you would rather be doing. So appreciate the passion and the concern and the understanding and all of the comments that you have submitted. So just to kind of go over a couple of things before we sign off for the evening, I want to just make sure everybody knows that we have a variety of ways to submit a comment. So I know not everybody that you know maybe has access to email. Maybe they'd like to, like Greg said earlier, mail some comments in. Perfectly acceptable. So you can mail your comments to Annette Switzer, who's our permit section manager here in Lansing. You can also send those comments in writing via email. The email address is eagle-aqd-pti public comments. So that's PTI public comments is all one word at michigan.gov. And then recently, not super recently, anybody who attended the last meeting probably does remember this, but we do have a voicemail. So if you get home and you feel like you have more things that you want to submit comments on, you can give us a call on our voicemail, and that number is 517-284-0900. Also want to just make sure I did put in the chat where you can find all the information about this proposed permit, but just to go over some of the things that are on that website, if you're interested. The proposed project summary is just like kind of a high level overview of what the proposed project actually is. The technical fact sheet digs into the details of what rules and regulations, how Dave and the team looked at those rules and applied them to this proposed project. You can also read those proposed terms and conditions, and we will be posting the recordings to the meetings there. You'll all be directly notified as well, so you'll get that probably in a variety of different ways. This is how you can contact us. So if you are still on and you want to jot any of these numbers or email addresses down, please feel free to do that. One other thing that I just want to mention to all of you, I hear your passion and I hear all of the things that you talked about tonight. And not that this is going to solve all of those things for you, but I do want to invite you. We are going to be having in May, the middle of May, an environmental justice conference, and that conference is geared towards folks like you, folks that have a lot of passion about what's going on in your community, folks that are maybe potentially feeling like their voice isn't being heard in these types of ways. There's going to be a lot of different sessions that are going to be ongoing for that week during the day, and then even some in the evening. I know we're going to be specifically talking about commenting on air permits, kind of with a panel of folks not in Eagle, some folks in Eagle and some folks outside of Eagle. So I hope that that's going to be something helpful for you. We'll make sure that you guys are all on the list to get that information when it becomes available. I know they haven't opened up registration yet. We're still working on the agenda. Regina Strong, who is our environmental justice public advocate, and Katie Cruz, who is on that team as well. They're both very passionate about this. This is what they do. We all are really here. We do hear what you're saying. So I would invite all of you to attend that, even a session or two, pick and choose what you want. Any questions that you have, you can always get a hold of me, get a hold of any of the staff people that you heard from or saw tonight. I think there's some issues and things that we definitely could talk a little bit more about. We could have a lot longer conversations about air monitoring and air modeling and what is going on in the community and how do you access information on the website. I'm hoping that we can get some sessions like that for folks that are interested, but in the interim, if you ever want to know any of that, you can always get a hold of me or any of the staff people, like I said, and we're happy to talk to people one-on-one. And sometimes that's easier because, as you heard tonight, one question leads to another question, leads to another question. So we're always happy to answer those and open to kind of walking you through some of those resources that we understand our website is not the easiest to navigate. In fact, we sometimes have issues with that ourselves. So again, I just really want to thank you for attending with us tonight, for sticking around, for listening, for commenting. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. You will be getting some feedback on this, as far as getting that recording and getting some information on what the decision ends up being on this proposed permit. So again, greatly appreciate your time this evening, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.